They threw me out on my 18th birthday. No cake, no candles, no apologies for the timing, just Mrs. Henderson's pinched expression as she handed me the discharge papers and a blue plastic bag containing everything St. Joseph's Home for Children thought I deserved after 15 years. The morning sun was barely up, painting the orphanage's brick facade in shades of rose and amber that made the building look almost beautiful, which felt like a final insult. Beautiful things were never meant for girls like me. Copper waited outside the iron gate, tail low, those amber eyes watching me with the kind of loyalty I'd never found in people. 3 years we'd been together since the afternoon I'd found him limping down Highway 50 with a gash on his leg and ribs showing through matted fur. The shelter said nobody would adopt a dog that size, that old, that damaged. I'd lied about my age and signed the papers anyway. We understood each other, Copper and I. We both knew what it meant to be unwanted. The discharge papers crinkled in my jacket pocket as I walked. 18 years, 2 months, 6 days. That's how long the state of Nevada had been legally obligated to care about whether I lived or died. Now I was an adult, which apparently meant I was somebody else's problem, or nobody's problem. The distinction didn't seem to matter much. Patricia found me at the bus stop 3 blocks down where the sidewalk cracked into weeds and the bench listed to one side like a drunk leaning against a wall. She'd been my English teacher for 2 years, the only adult at St. Joseph's who'd ever looked at me like I might be worth the trouble. Her gray sedan pulled up with a soft wheeze of old brakes. The window came down. Her face was drawn tired in the morning light, but her eyes were fierce. "You're not taking the Greyhound." My throat tightened. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation won the way it always did. "I don't have anywhere else to go." She reached across and pushed open the passenger door. "Library in Pine Creek is hiring. I called in a favor. It's not much, but there's a room in the back and the librarian is good people." 4 hours in Patricia's car, heading east into the kind of Nevada that tourists never saw. Not the glittering casinos or the manufactured charm of Reno's downtown, but the vast, punishing emptiness of the Mojave's northern edge. Copper's head rested on my lap, his breath warm through my jeans. Patricia drove in silence, mostly except to hand me $200 in 20s when we stopped for gas outside Fallon. The bills felt obscene in my hands. "I can't." Her voice was gentle but unyielding. "You can and you will. And Margot—" She waited until I looked at her. "Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's not weakness. That's survival." The words lodged somewhere behind my ribs, painful and precious at once. I folded the money carefully and tucked it into my wallet, which contained my ID, a gas station receipt from 2019, and a photo of a woman I couldn't remember. My mother, allegedly. Isabel Walker. Dead since I was 3 in a car accident nobody would give me details about. I'd stopped asking years ago. Pine Creek appeared like a mirage shimmering off the desert floor. Population 847 according to a faded sign. A main street lined with sun-bleached storefronts, a gas station with pumps from the 1990s, a diner advertising breakfast all day. The library sat at the end of the street, a small adobe building with blue shutters and a garden struggling against the heat. Patricia pulled up front and killed the engine. The silence felt enormous. She turned to me and I saw the shine in her eyes before she blinked it away. "You're going to be fine." I wanted to believe her. I nodded because words would have broken something in my chest. She touched my hand, briefly squeezed, then let go. "Go on now." The library's interior was cool and smelled of paper and dust and something green, maybe the herbs growing in clay pots along the windowsill. Copper's nails clicked on the tile floor as we entered. A woman looked up from behind the circulation desk, and I felt my entire future pivot on whatever expression crossed her face in the next 3 seconds. She smiled. Not the careful professional smile adults gave foster kids, but something genuine that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. "You must be Margot." Patricia called ahead. Dr. Evelyn Blackwood was 67 and looked like someone who'd lived every one of those years with intention. Silver hair cut short and neat wire-rimmed glasses perched on a narrow nose, the kind of compact, efficient frame that suggested she'd never wasted emotion in her life. Her eyes were sharp and blue behind the lenses, taking me in with the same thorough assessment I was giving her. I managed to nod. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for considering me." Something flickered across her face, amusement or maybe recognition. "Let's skip the formalities. I'm Evelyn, or Evie if you prefer. You look exhausted. The room's through here and there's a sandwich in the fridge if you're hungry. We can talk about the job later. The kindness was worse than indifference would have been. Kindness made me want to cry, and I'd learned long ago that crying accomplished nothing except making your eyes burn and your nose run. I followed her through a door marked "Staff Only" into a small room with a cot, a dresser, and a window that looked out on the desert stretching endlessly east. It was the first space that had ever been entirely mine. Copper circled twice and collapsed on a braided rug by the cot, groaning as he settled. Evelyn set a key on the dresser. Lock's temperamental, but it works if you jiggle it. Bathroom's across the hall. I'm usually here until 6, but I live upstairs, so don't worry about bothering me. She left before I could figure out how to thank her. I sat on the cot, which creaked but held, and stared at my hands. The calluses from years of mandatory kitchen duty at St. Joseph's, the scar on my thumb from a broken glass when I was 12, the cheap digital watch Patricia had given me last Christmas. Proof that I existed, that I'd survived this long, that maybe I could survive a little longer. The envelope arrived 3 days later, forwarded from an address I'd used when applying for my ID last year. Law offices of Morrison and Chen, Reno, Nevada. The paper was expensive cream-colored with my name written in flowing script across the front. I stared at it through my shift shelving books, through my lunch break, through the afternoon heat that made the adobe walls radiate warmth like a living thing. Evelyn found me on the back steps at closing time, the envelope still unopened in my hands. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside me and waited. Copper pushed his head under her hand, shameless in his affection, and she scratched behind his ears absently. Finally, I tore it open. The letter inside was brief and devastating. Dear Ms. Walker, regarding the estate of Vivian Rose, Walker, deceased December 2023. You have been named sole beneficiary of property located at 4127 Desert Road, Pine Creek, Nevada. Terms of inheritance require your physical presence and completion of specific conditions within 30 days of notification. Please contact this office to arrange transfer of deed and keys. The words swam. Vivian Rose Walker, my grandmother. A woman I'd never met, never even knew existed until the name appeared on official documents when I was 11 and started asking questions about my family. The social workers had been vague. Estranged, complicated history, not in contact. All the polite ways of saying we don't want to talk about it. My hands shook. Evelyn took the letter, gently read it, and let out a low whistle. Well, that's unexpected. The understatement made me laugh, a sharp, breathless sound. I don't understand. Why would she leave me anything? She never even tried to find me. Evelyn's expression was thoughtful. Maybe she did try, or maybe she couldn't. Family law is complicated, especially if there were legal issues. She handed the letter back. What are you going to do? 24 hours ago, I would have had no answer. But sitting on those sun-warmed steps with a dog sleeping across my feet and a woman who'd given me shelter without asking for anything in return, I felt something shift inside my chest. Curiosity, maybe, or anger, or the desperate, irrational hope that somewhere in a dead woman's belongings I might find something that explained why I'd spent my entire life alone. My voice came out steady. I'm going to find out what she left me. The property was 20 miles outside Pine Creek proper, down a dirt road that Evelyn's ancient Volvo protested with every rut and washboard. The August heat shimmered off the desert floor in waves, turning the air to liquid silver. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, their arms raised in permanent surrender to the sun. In the distance, mountains rose in shades of rust and ochre, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Evelyn drove with the confidence of someone who'd navigated these roads for decades. The air conditioning wheezed gamely, pushing out air that was merely hot instead of scorching. She'd insisted on coming, citing liability and common sense, and a dozen other reasons that boiled down to she wasn't letting an 18-year-old girl drive out into the desert alone. We talked, or rather she talked, and I listened, about Vivian Walker, the name that had apparently meant something in Pine Creek once upon a time. She was the only electrical engineer in the county back in the 80s and 90s. Brilliant woman, ahead of her time, really. There was some kind of scandal in 2004, accusations of fraud, legal troubles. After that, she just disappeared from public life. I saw her in town occasionally at the hardware store or the post office. She always seemed very alone. The words hit harder than they should have. What kind of fraud? Evelyn's hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel. Contracts with the power company, I think. Something about a project she was developing. The details were murky and I wasn't involved. But the timing was bad. Her daughter ran away that same year. Isabel, your mother. She would have been about 16. Isabel. My mother's name felt foreign in my mouth, like a word from a language I'd never learned to speak. I tried to imagine her at 16 my age, plus 2 years running from scandal and a mother accused of crimes. Running so far and so hard that she'd never looked back, never reconciled, never mentioned Vivian's name to the daughter she'd born at 20 and died leaving behind at 3. The bitterness tasted like copper on my tongue. The gas station materialized out of the heat haze like something from a fever dream. Pine Creek Gas and Supply, the sign read, though the letters had faded to ghostly outlines against sun-bleached wood. 2 pumps stood guard out front, their hoses cracked and dangling rust consuming the metal in slow oxidation. The main building was low and flat-roofed, its white paint peeling in long strips that revealed gray wood underneath. A storage shed leaned at a dangerous angle to one side, its door hanging from a single hinge. Evelyn parked and we sat in silence, engine ticking as it cooled. Even through the windshield, the abandonment was palpable. This place had been dead a long time. I opened the door and stepped into heat that hit like a physical blow. Copper jumped out after me, immediately investigating the perimeter with his nose to the ground. The air smelled of hot dust and creosote and something chemical, old oil maybe baked into the concrete by decades of desert sun. The brass key from the lawyer's office felt heavy in my pocket. I walked toward the building, slowly aware of Evelyn behind me, her presence a small comfort. The concrete lot was cracked in 1,000 places, weeds forcing through the gaps with the stubborn persistence of desert life. Broken glass crunched under my shoes near one pump. A faded Coca-Cola sign hung askew by the door. The key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been waiting for exactly this moment. The door swung inward with a prolonged shriek of hinges. Darkness yawned beyond, and the smell that rolled out was thick with dust and stale air and abandonment. I stepped inside. The front office was small, dominated by a counter that had once been white formica, but was now yellowed and water-stained. Metal shelves lined the walls, most empty, a few still holding ancient inventory. Motor oil in cans with logos from the 1990s. A display of air fresheners shaped like pine trees, their scent long evaporated. A rack of maps for Nevada highways that no longer existed in their current form. Dust lay thick on every surface undisturbed for years. My footprints marked the floor like tracks in snow. Behind the counter, a small office held a desk, a filing cabinet, and a corkboard still pinned with receipts and delivery slips dated 2004. 20 years ago, the year everything had fallen apart. Copper whined, his attention fixed on the back corner of the office. I followed his gaze and saw it. A door painted the same flat white as the walls, easy to miss in the shadows. No handle visible, just a keyhole that gleamed faintly in the dusty light filtering through the grimy windows. The second key was exactly where the lawyer's instructions had indicated, taped underneath the desk drawer with yellowed adhesive. My fingers were shaking as I peeled it free. This felt like something from a detective novel, all hidden keys and secret doors. Except this wasn't fiction. This was my inheritance, my grandmother's final message, whatever the hell that meant. The sound of an engine killed my momentum. Copper's ears pricked forward, then flattened as a growl rumbled deep in his chest. Through the window, I watched a black pickup truck pull into the lot, expensive and immaculate against the derelict backdrop. The door opened and a man stepped out. Evelyn appeared at my shoulder, tense. "That's Garrett Sterling." The name meant nothing to me, but the way she said it suggested it should. I watched him approach, taking in details. Mid-40s, tall and well-built, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. Dark hair going gray at the temples, styled with precision. A face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his gray eyes, the set of his mouth that suggested he'd never heard the word no in any context that mattered. He knocked once, a formality, then pushed open the door I'd left ajar. His gaze swept the room, cataloging everything before settling on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The smile he offered was practice designed to put people at ease. It failed spectacularly. "You must be Margot Walker." "I'm Garrett Sterling, Sterling Energy Solutions. I knew your grandmother." The casual familiarity in his voice set my teeth on edge. I didn't offer my hand. "Did you?" Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or irritation. Vivian was a remarkable woman. Brilliant, really. It's a shame about how things ended. He paused, letting the weight of unspoken history fill the silence. I heard you'd inherited the property. I wanted to reach out before you made any decisions you might regret. The phrasing was careful, calibrated. I crossed my arms, aware of Copper's solid presence against my leg, still growling low. What kind of decisions? Sterling pulled a document from his jacket pocket, unfolded it with deliberate slowness. This property has been cited for code violations, structural instability, environmental hazards, unpermitted electrical work. The county has been considering condemnation for 2 years. I've been working with them to resolve the situation. He extended the paper toward me. I'm prepared to offer $50,000 for the land and building. Cash, quick closing. It would save you a great deal of trouble. I took the document, scanned it. Official letterhead county seal language I didn't fully understand but recognized as threatening. My stomach twisted. $50,000. That was more money than I could imagine having. More than enough to go to college, get an apartment, build some kind of life. All I had to do was sign away a property I'd never seen before today that belonged to a woman who'd never bothered to know me. Evelyn spoke before I could, her voice sharp. Those violations were filed when exactly? Sterling's smile tightened fractionally. Initial notice was 2022, updated this spring. The year before Vivian died. The timing felt deliberate, predatory. I looked up from the document, met Sterling's eyes, and saw something beneath the professional veneer. Hunger. Calculation. The expression of a man who wanted something badly and was accustomed to getting it. My voice came out harder than I'd intended. I'll think about it. His jaw tightened. I understand this is overwhelming. You're young, you've just arrived, you don't know the situation. But Margot, I'm trying to help you here. This property is worthless. Dangerous even. The smart thing is to take the money and walk away. The condescension in his tone made my decision easier. Like I said, I'll think about it. We stared at each other, a contest of wills I had no business winning, but refused to lose. Finally, Sterling folded the document and tucked it back into his jacket with movements just slightly too precise. You have 30 days according to the inheritance terms. After that, if the conditions aren't met, the property defaults to public auction. I'll be sure to attend. He turned to leave, paused at the door. Your grandmother was stubborn too. It didn't serve her well. The words landed like a threat wrapped in sympathy. I hope you're smarter than she was. The door closed behind him. His truck's engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as he pulled away too fast. The dust he kicked up hung in the air, golden in the late afternoon sun, taking long minutes to settle. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Let it out slowly, feeling my hands shake with delayed adrenaline. Evelyn's presence beside me was steady grounding. When I finally looked at her, her expression was troubled. Her voice was quiet. That man has owned the only power company in Pine Creek for 20 years. He controls who gets electricity and who doesn't, who pays standard rates and who gets billed extra for mysterious surcharges. Nobody crosses Garrett Sterling because nobody wants to find out what happens when he decides to make their life difficult. The implications settled over me like a physical weight. You think he's lying about the violations? She shook her head slowly. I think the violations are probably real. But I also think he filed them himself or had them filed because he wants this land for something. And whatever that something is, it's worth more than $50,000. The hidden door suddenly felt more significant. I pulled out the second key, turned it toward the light. I need to see what she left me. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. We moved to the door together. Copper pressed against my leg, warm and solid, as I fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click that seemed loud in the heavy silence. A draft of cooler air escaped from beneath, carrying the scent of earth and metal and something else I couldn't identify. The door opened on silent hinges to reveal stairs descending into darkness. I'd never been afraid of the dark exactly, but standing at the top of those stairs, I felt the weight of all the things I didn't know pressing down. Who Vivian Walker had really been, why she'd left this place to me, what Sterling wanted badly enough to threaten for, what my mother had run from at 16 that she'd never run back. Evelyn flicked a switch I hadn't seen. Light bloomed below, fluorescent and harsh, revealing concrete steps leading down about 15 feet. The walls were unfinished, showing the raw earth and rock that the structure had been carved from. We descended together, Copper refusing to be left behind despite his obvious discomfort. At the bottom, the space opened into a room roughly 15 feet by 20. The walls lined with metal shelves and equipment I didn't have names for. Solar panels I recognized leaning against one wall. Their surfaces were dusty but intact. Boxes labeled in neat handwriting. Inverters, batteries, copper wire, 8-gauge. In the center of the room, mounted on a metal table, was a control panel that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Switches and meters, indicator lights dark. Everything connected by a spider's web of cables that ran along the ceiling and disappeared into conduits drilled through the rock. But what made my breath catch was the wall map. Large format, hand-drawn with precise detail, showing Pine Creek and the surrounding area. 15 houses marked with red dots. Lines traced underground from the gas station to each one. And beside 3 of the dots, someone had written in careful capitals, "Active." Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Finch, Joe's garage. Evelyn moved to the map, traced one of the lines with her finger. Her voice was barely a whisper. She built a microgrid. I didn't know what that meant. A what? She turned to me, and her expression was something between awe and heartbreak. An independent power system. Solar, probably wind 2 battery backup, completely separate from the main grid. In 2004, this technology existed, but it was experimental, expensive, years ahead of mainstream adoption. If Vivian got this working, if these 3 houses have been running on renewable power for 20 years without anyone knowing. She trailed off, shaking her head. This is genius. This is revolutionary. The words didn't quite compute. My grandmother, the woman who'd never contacted me, who'd let me grow up in state care without once reaching out, had built something revolutionary in a basement under an abandoned gas station. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I moved to the shelves, ran my fingers over the equipment. Everything was labeled, organized, maintained, despite decades of disuse. This wasn't the work of someone who'd given up. This was careful, deliberate, purposeful. A project that had mattered enough to hide. Sterling's face flashed in my memory. His careful words about violations and condemnation. His insistence that I sell immediately, take the money, walk away. If he knew about this, if he'd always known, then his offer wasn't generosity. It was theft, dressed in a suit. Evelyn was examining the control panel, her engineer's training evident in the careful way she traced connections without touching anything. This is incredibly sophisticated for 20 years ago. The wiring alone would have cost thousands. And if it's been running this whole time, powering 3 buildings. She looked up at me. Margot, do you understand what this means? If we can document this, if we can prove Sterling filed false violations to force a sale, he could lose everything. His company, his contracts, maybe face criminal charges. The possibility should have thrilled me. Instead, I felt only exhaustion. Why didn't she fight him before? Why let him win? The question hung in the cool air. Evelyn didn't have an answer, and I didn't expect one. We stood in my grandmother's hidden workshop, surrounded by evidence of brilliance and determination and some kind of last stand that had failed 20 years ago. Now Sterling was back, circling like a vulture, ready to finish what he'd started. My voice came out harder than I'd intended. I'm staying. Evelyn's eyes widened. Margot, you can't live here. There's no running water, no. I cut her off. Just for tonight. I need to think. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. When she opened her mouth to argue, I added, please, I'll be fine. Copper's here. She looked torn, maternal instinct warring with respect for my autonomy. Finally, she sighed. I'll bring water and food. And a flashlight. The electricity here might not be reliable. She left reluctantly, her Volvo's taillights disappearing into the dusk. I was alone for the first time since Patricia had dropped me at the library, truly alone in a way that felt both terrifying and necessary. Copper settled by the door with a heavy sigh, resigned to his human's incomprehensible decisions. I explored the upper level as the light faded, finding a small restroom that still had water in the tank, a storage closet filled with cleaning supplies from another era, a tiny office behind the counter that I'd missed before. The desk drawer held more keys, a checkbook with a balance of $14 from 2004, a photograph in a cheap frame. 2 women, one in her 40s, tall and angular with dark hair pulled back severely, wearing coveralls and holding a wrench like she knew exactly what to do with it. The other was younger, maybe 10 or 11, with Isabel's eyes. My mother's eyes. The same shape, the same color, looking at the camera with an expression I couldn't quite read. Defiance, maybe. Or hope. or the complicated mixture of both that comes from being young and wanting something you can't name yet. I set the photo on the desk, feeling something crack open in my chest. This was them, my family such as it was. Before the scandal, before Isabel ran, before I was born into a world that had already decided I didn't belong to anyone. Night fell hard and fast in the desert. One moment the horizon was painted in bands of orange and purple, the next it was full dark with stars emerging like holes punched in black paper. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. I found a sleeping bag in the storage closet, musty but intact, and spread it on the floor of the small office. Copper curled against my back, his warmth better than any blanket. I tried to sleep. Failed. My mind was too full of Sterling's threats and Evelyn's revelations, and that photograph of two women who'd loved each other once before everything fell apart. The gas station creaked and settled around me, old wood and metal contracting in the cooling air, each sound sharp in the silence. That's when I heard it. A different sound, rhythmic and deliberate. Footsteps on gravel, moving slowly, carefully, circling the building. Copper's head came up, ears forward. His growl started low, almost subsonic, a warning vibration I felt more than heard. I sat up slowly, heart hammering. The footsteps continued unhurried, not trying to hide but not announcing themselves either. I reached for my phone, remembered there was no signal out here. The flashlight Evelyn had left was by the door, useless if I didn't want to advertise my position. The footsteps stopped at the front door. A long pause. Then the handle rattled, testing. Once, twice. The door held. I'd locked it behind Evelyn, some instinct for self-preservation overriding my usual carelessness. Silence stretched. I counted heartbeats, 30, 40. Then the footsteps resumed moving around the building toward the back, where the second entrance was the one I hadn't checked, hadn't thought to secure. Copper was on his feet, hackles raised. I grabbed his collar, held him close. Every muscle in my body was tensed to run or fight or scream, but I did none of those things. I stayed frozen, barely breathing as the footsteps circled back to the front and stopped again. A shadow passed the window, tall, broad-shouldered, backlit by starlight. It paused there, and I could feel the weight of attention on the other side of that glass. Looking in, searching. Then it was gone. The footsteps retreated across the gravel, fading into the desert silence. I waited, counting slowly to 100, then 200. Nothing. Just the wind picking up, rattling the loose metal siding on the storage shed. Just my own breathing, too loud in my ears. Just Copper's warmth and the cold seeping up through the concrete floor. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat with my back against the wall. Copper pressed against my side, and thought about Vivian Walker building something revolutionary in a basement while the world called her a criminal. About Isabel running from scandal and shame and a mother who wouldn't or couldn't protect her. About Sterling circling this property like a shark waiting for the moment to strike. And I thought about that shadow at the window, whether it had been real or imagined threat or warning, a random vagrant or something more deliberate. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I'd made my decision. I wasn't running. I wasn't selling. Whatever Vivian had started, whatever Sterling wanted to bury, I was going to uncover it. Not for her exactly. She'd had 18 years to find me and hadn't. But for Isabel, maybe. For the girl in that photograph who'd deserved better than what she got. And for myself. For the chance to finally understand where I came from, and maybe an understanding to figure out where I was going. The journal was where the second key had been taped inside the desk drawer. Leather-bound, worn soft, with handling pages covered in Vivian's precise handwriting. I opened it as the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and copper, and began to read the story of the Aurora Project. The story of my inheritance. The story I suspected that someone had been willing to kill for 20 years ago, and might be willing to kill for again. Vivian's handwriting was precise, each letter formed with the care of someone who understood that documentation mattered. The journal began in January 1998, entries sparse at first, technical observations about solar panel efficiency and battery degradation rates. Then March brought a shift in tone. Sterling came by again today, third time this month. He wants to see the schematics, says his company could help scale production, bring Aurora to market. I told him no. Something in his eyes when he looks at the panels. Not curiosity. Hunger. I traced the words with my finger, imagining Vivian at this same desk 26 years ago, sensing danger, but not yet understanding its shape. The entries continued through spring and summer, documenting successful tests of the underground system. By August, the first house was connected. Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore, address listed as 412 Juniper Street. Adelaide cried when the lights came on, said it was the first time in 40 years she hadn't worried about the power bill. Thomas would have loved to see this. He always believed clean energy was possible. I'm proving him right, one house at a time. Thomas. My grandfather, presumably. Another ghost in a family tree of people who'd existed just beyond my reach. I filed the name away and kept reading. October 1998 brought the second connection. Harold Finch, a widower with emphysema who needed reliable power for his oxygen concentrator. The entry about him was brief but triumphant. By 2003, houses ran on Aurora. Vivian wrote about expansion plans, about approaching the county with a proposal for a pilot program, about the future she could see so clearly. Then 2003 and Sterling's name appeared again. He knows. Don't know how, but he knows about the full scope of Aurora. Came to the station with lawyers, contracts, promises of partnership. When I refused, his face changed. The mask slipped. He said I was making a mistake. Said women like me don't understand business. Said he'd give me one more chance to be reasonable. I'm installing additional security tomorrow, moving the most sensitive equipment to the second chamber. If something happens to me, the documentation is in the safe. Code is Isabel's birthday reversed. My hands stilled on the page. Second chamber. The room I'd been in last night had been the first level, but somewhere below that, deeper in the earth, Vivian had built something else. Something important enough to hide even within a hidden workshop. The journal entries became frantic after that, legal bills mounting, accusations of fraud appearing in official documents, Sterling's company filing complaints with the county about unauthorized electrical work, and through it all, Isabel's name appearing in the margins, fragments of a deteriorating relationship. Isabel won't speak to me. She believes I'm some kind of criminal. She's 16 and terrified, and I don't know how to reach her anymore. Maybe I should have told her everything from the start. Maybe honesty would have mattered more than protection. The final entry was dated September 15, 2004. Isabel's gone. Packed her things and left sometime in the night. No note. No goodbye. I've lost everything that matters, my daughter, my reputation, any chance of Aurora seeing the light of day. But I won't lose the work itself. Sterling can have the station, the land, everything visible. The real project is safe, buried where only someone who understands what they're looking for will find it. Someday when the truth comes out, maybe Isabel will understand. Maybe my granddaughter will. The word granddaughter hit me like a physical blow. In 2004 I hadn't existed yet. Isabel had been 16, childless, running from scandal, and a mother she thought had betrayed her. But somehow Vivian had known, had believed, had built all of this with the faith that someday someone would come looking. I set the journal down carefully, my vision blurred. The sunrise was painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, beautiful and merciless. Copper stirred beside me, stretched, whined softly. His water bowl was empty. Mine too. The realization of basic needs pulled me back from the edge of tears that wanted to fall. Evelyn's Volvo appeared at 7:30, trailing dust. She emerged carrying a cooler and what looked like half the contents of her kitchen. Her face was drawn with worry that eased slightly when she saw me standing in the doorway, alive and intact. The relief in her voice was palpable. "You look terrible." I managed something approximating a smile. "Didn't sleep much." We set up a makeshift breakfast on the hood of her car, still warm from the drive. Coffee from a thermos, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a plastic container of sliced melon that tasted like summer and normalcy. She didn't ask about the night until I'd eaten, didn't push, just waited with the patience of someone who understood that some stories needed their own time. Finally, I told her about the prowler, the shadow at the window, the journal entries detailing Sterling's escalation 20 years ago, about the second chamber Vivian had mentioned, still hidden somewhere beneath the first. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We need to report this. The prowling, at least. Sterling can't just—" I cut her off. "The sheriff is his friend. You said it yourself. Nobody crosses Sterling in this town." Her silence was agreement. We cleaned up the breakfast debris, packed the trash carefully because you don't leave garbage in the desert if you want to come back. Then she pulled out a canvas bag I hadn't noticed, started unpacking tools. A voltage tester, insulated gloves, wire strippers, a headlamp. She caught my expression. You didn't think I'd let you explore that basement without proper equipment, did you? I may be retired, but I'm still an engineer. The basement was cooler in daylight, less oppressive. Evelyn moved through the space with professional efficiency, testing circuits, examining connections, occasionally making notes in a small spiral notebook. I watched her work, trying to absorb the technical knowledge through osmosis. She straightened from examining the control panel, wiped dust from her hands. This is incredibly sophisticated. The switching system alone would have cost tens of thousands in 2004. And look here. She pointed to a series of cables running through a conduit in the floor. These go deeper. Your grandmother wasn't exaggerating about a second level. We found the access point behind a shelf unit that took both of us to move. A metal hatch set flush with the concrete floor, secured with a padlock that looked newer than everything else in the room. No key in sight. Evelyn examined it, tried the lock experimentally. We could cut it, but I'd rather not destroy property if there's another way. She glanced at me. Your grandmother mentioned a code in the journal, Isabel's birthday reversed, but I didn't know my mother's birthday, had never had reason to ask, had actively avoided thinking about a woman who died when I was too young to remember her. The social workers had known, probably. The information existed somewhere in files I'd never requested, never wanted to see. My voice came out smaller than intended. I don't know when she was born. Evelyn's expression softened. She pulled out her phone, tapped, and scrolled. No signal down here, but I downloaded property records last night. Vivian's probate file is public record. Let me see. More scrolling. Here. Isabel Marie Walker, born July 22nd, 1988. July 22nd, 1988. My mother had been 38 when she died, leaving me at 3. The math felt important somehow, a way of anchoring her existence in objective reality. Reversed, 88. 22. 07. I tried the combination on the padlock. It opened with a soft click. The hatch was heavy, requiring both of us to lift. Below, a ladder descended into darkness that the basement's fluorescent lights didn't reach. Evelyn aimed her headlamp down, illuminating rough-cut rock walls and another 10 feet of depth. Her voice held equal parts excitement and caution. I'll go first. If anything feels unstable, we come back up immediately. The second chamber was vast. 40 feet by 50 at least, the ceiling high enough to stand upright, the walls showing the marks of careful excavation. And in the center, impossibly a geothermal system that shouldn't have existed in a secret basement under a gas station in the middle of nowhere. The pipes were thick industrial steel descending through a borehole that must have gone 200 feet into the earth, a closed-loop system. Evelyn explained, her voice hushed with something like reverence. Water circulated down to where the Earth's heat was constant, returned as steam, to drive turbines condensed and cycled back. No fuel needed, no emissions. Just the planet's own warmth transformed into electrical power. The turbines themselves were dormant now, their blades still, but the engineering was elegant. 3 units each capable of generating enough power to support 50 homes. The control panel dwarfed the one upstairs, a wall of switches and displays and monitoring equipment that would have looked at home in a power plant. And beside it, mounted at eye level, a safe with a biometric lock. The screen glowed faintly in the headlamp's beam. DNA verification required. I pressed my thumb to the sensor without thinking. The screen flickered. Partial match, 51%. Access denied. Requirement system must power minimum 10 connected homes. The message was clear. Vivian had designed this as a test, a challenge, a way of ensuring that whoever inherited Aurora would have to complete her work to claim its full legacy. I couldn't just take the money and run. I had to finish what she'd started, or the safe would never open. Evelyn was examining the geothermal system with the focused intensity of someone solving a puzzle they'd been born to complete. This is revolutionary. Even now, in 2024, residential geothermal of this scale is rare. In 2004, it would have been... She trailed off, shaking her head. Your grandmother was decades ahead of the industry. The weight of that settled over me. Not just brilliant, but visionary. Not just talented, but transformative. And Sterling had destroyed her for it, buried her work, stolen credit for ideas he couldn't have conceived himself. The injustice burned in my chest like swallowed fire. We surfaced an hour later, blinking in the harsh daylight. My head ached from the dry air and insufficient sleep. Evelyn looked energized, purpose overriding fatigue. She had that light in her eyes that people get when they've found something worth fighting for. Her voice was decisive. We need to document everything. Photograph the systems, catalog the equipment, pull records from the county about Sterling's fraud case. If we can prove Aurora was operational before he filed his accusations, if we can demonstrate that he knew about it and tried to steal it. I interrupted. How do we prove any of that? It's been 20 years. She smiled, sharp and fierce. The houses, the 3 that are still connected. If they've been running on Aurora this whole time, there will be evidence. Power bills that don't match usage or no bills at all. Testimony from the residents. Physical proof that the system works and has worked continuously since before Sterling's accusations. Hope kindled, fragile but real. Starting with Mrs. Whitmore. The Whitmore house sat on Juniper Street, a small adobe structure with a garden that defied the desert through sheer, stubborn determination. Roses climbed a trellis by the door, improbable pink blooms against the tan walls. Solar panels lined the roof, but old ones, the kind from the early 2000s that predated modern efficiency standards. Willa Whitmore answered on the second knock. 82 years old, according to Evelyn's quick research, white hair in a neat bun, wearing a house dress that had probably been fashionable in 1985 and had aged into timeless practicality. Her eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, taking in both of us with the assessing gaze of someone who'd survived 8 decades by being nobody's fool. Her voice was surprisingly strong. Evelyn Blackwood, haven't seen you in a month, and you must be Vivian's granddaughter. You have her jaw. The observation startled me. Nobody had ever told me I looked like anyone connected me to a genetic lineage, acknowledged that I'd come from somewhere specific. I touched my face unconsciously, trying to feel whatever Willa saw. She stepped back, held the door open. Come in. I've been wondering when someone would finally ask the right questions. The interior was cool shaded, filled with furniture from another era that had been maintained with obvious care. Family photos lined the mantel above a fireplace that probably hadn't been used in years. She gestured us to a floral sofa, disappeared into the kitchen, returned with lemonade in glass pitchers, sweating condensation. We sat. She poured. The ritual of hospitality complete, she folded her hands in her lap and looked at me directly. Vivian Walker was the finest person I ever knew. What they did to her was criminal. What Sterling did was criminal. And I've been waiting 20 years for someone to care enough to prove it. The bitterness in her voice was decades old, fermented into something harder than anger. I set down my lemonade carefully. Tell me what happened. She did. The story poured out detail after detail that filled in the gaps the journal had left. How Vivian had approached her in 1998 with a proposal that sounded like science fiction. Free electricity, completely clean, independent from the grid. How skeptical Willa had been until the day the system went live and her lights blazed without touching the power company's lines. Willa's eyes grew distant with memory. I'd been paying Sterling Energy $200 a month, sometimes more in summer when the air conditioning ran. Fixed income, you understand. That money mattered. When Vivian connected me to Aurora, my bills stopped. Just stopped. Sterling's company kept sending statements for a while, then gave up. I've lived here for 40 years, and I haven't paid for electricity in 26 of them. Evelyn leaned forward. Sterling knows about your connection to Aurora. The old woman's laugh was bitter. Of course he knows. Came here himself in 2004, right after he accused Vivian of fraud. Told me I was using stolen electricity, that he could have me arrested, that my house would be condemned. Then he offered me a deal. Keep my mouth shut about Aurora, and he'd pretend he'd never noticed my power bills had stopped. Speak up and he'd make sure I lost everything. My hands clenched. Why didn't you fight him? Willa's gaze was steady, unflinching. Because I'm an old woman living alone on Social Security. Because Sterling owned the sheriff and the county commissioners and the newspaper. Because Vivian herself told me not to. She came here the night before she disappeared from public life. Said she'd lost everything that mattered and didn't want me losing what I had left. Made me promise to keep Aurora secret until someone came looking who could actually do something about it. The implications crystallized. Vivian hadn't just lost a legal battle. She'd been threatened, possibly worse, into silence. Had sacrificed her reputation and her relationship with her daughter to protect a handful of people she'd helped. Had spent the rest of her life hiding in plain sight, maintaining a system that no one knew existed, waiting for vindication that had never come. Until now. Until me. My voice was rough. The other 2 houses, Mr. Finch and Joe's garage. Are they—" Willa nodded. "Harold died 3 years ago, but his son Luther still lives there. And Joe's been running that garage on Aurora Power since 1999. They'll tell you the same story I am. We've all been waiting. We all want Sterling to answer for what he did." Evidence. Testimony. Proof of a conspiracy that had lasted 2 decades. The pieces were falling into place, but I didn't know how to use them, didn't understand the legal system well enough to transform injustice into action. The frustration must have shown on my face because Evelyn touched my arm gently. Her voice was calm, grounding. "One step at a time. First we document everything. Then we find a lawyer who specializes in fraud cases. Sterling has power in Pine Creek, but Nevada is bigger than one town. There are people who will care about this." I wanted to believe her. Chose to believe her because the alternative was despair, and I'd spent too many years in despair already. We thanked Willa, promised to keep her updated, left with her lemonade sweet on our tongues and her story heavy in our hearts. The library felt like sanctuary after the emotional weight of the Whitmore house. Evelyn disappeared into the archives, emerging with boxes of old newspapers, county records, business filings. We spread them across a reading table and dove in 2 archaeologists excavating 20-year-old crimes. The newspaper coverage painted a clear picture. Sterling, 25 years old, ambitious, recently hired as chief engineer for Pine Creek Power Company. Vivian, 50, independent, working on experimental energy projects that the company viewed as competition. The fraud charges appeared suddenly in June 2004, unauthorized electrical work contract violations, theft of proprietary designs. The articles quoted Sterling extensively. Concerned citizen, protecting the community, regrettable situation. Vivian had declined to comment, which the paper interpreted as guilt. By August, the case was settled. Vivian paid the fine, agreed to cease all electrical engineering work in the county, surrendered her business license. The Aurora project disappeared from public record as if it had never existed. But the business filings told a different story. Sterling Energy Solutions Incorporated, October 2004. Initial patents filed, November 2004. I pulled the patent documents, scanned the technical descriptions, and my blood went cold. They were Vivian's designs, not similar, not inspired by, but exact copies of the schematics in her journal, the distributed solar array configuration, the battery management system, even the geothermal integration methodology. All filed under Sterling's name, dated 2 months after Vivian's settlement. Evelyn saw my face. "What is it?" I pushed the documents toward her, watched her read, watched comprehension dawn, watched fury light her features from within. When she spoke, her voice shook. "He didn't just destroy her reputation, he stole her life's work and built an empire on it." The scope of the theft was staggering. Sterling Energy Solutions had grown into a regional power company worth millions, built on patents that should have belonged to a woman who'd died alone and forgotten in December 2023. Every dollar Sterling had made, every house he'd connected, every accolade he'd received for innovation in renewable energy, all of it rested on a foundation of fraud so blatant I couldn't understand how he'd gotten away with it. Except I could understand. Vivian had been a woman in a male-dominated field, working independently without institutional backing. Sterling had been young, charismatic, connected to the existing power structures. When their stories conflicted, the world had chosen to believe him, had found it easier, more comfortable, more convenient to accept his version of events. And Isabel, 16 and desperate to believe in something, had chosen to believe him too. Had run from her mother rather than stand beside her. The tragedy of it threatened to choke me. We worked until the library closed, photocopying everything, building a file that grew thicker with each discovery. By evening, we had documentation of the original Aurora designs, proof of their theft, evidence of the working system that predated Sterling's accusations. What we didn't have was a smoking gun, direct proof that he'd known about Aurora before filing the fraud charges. That proof arrived the next morning, delivered by accident and spite in equal measure. Sterling's black pickup appeared at the gas station at 8 a.m. I'd spent the night at the library, unwilling to risk another encounter with midnight prowlers, and was just arriving when he pulled in. He emerged looking sharp in another expensive suit, carrying a leather folder that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. His smile was venomous politeness. "Margot, I hoped we could talk business." I crossed my arms. "I told you I'd think about your offer." The smile tightened. "That was before. Now I'm here on official business." He opened the folder, extracted a document. County building inspector completed a site review yesterday. Found multiple code violations that present imminent safety hazards. You have 72 hours to vacate the property before it's condemned. The paper he handed me was dense with legal language, but certain phrases leaped out. Structural instability, environmental contamination, unpermitted excavation, 72 hours. My voice came out flat. You can't do this. He smiled wider. It's already done. The county takes safety seriously, especially when anonymous tips reveal dangerous conditions. Once the property is condemned, it defaults to public auction. I've already submitted my bid. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Use his connections to force condemnation, buy the land for pennies at auction, bury Aurora forever. And there was nothing I could do about it because I was 18 and broke and fighting a system that had been rigged against people like me since long before I was born. Sterling must have seen the defeat in my eyes because his expression softened into something worse than anger. Pity. I did try to make this easy for you. 50,000 is more than this dump is worth. You should have taken it. He turned to leave. I don't know what made me say it. What combination of rage and desperation and Vivian's stubborn ghost pushed the words out. I know what you did. I have her journal. I have the patent applications. I know you stole Aurora. He stopped. The silence stretched, broken only by the desert wind, and my heartbeat thundering in my ears. When he turned back, all pretense of civility was gone. His face was stone, his eyes chips of flint. The threat in his voice was absolute. You have no idea what you're playing with. Your grandmother learned that lesson the hard way. I'd hate for history to repeat itself. Then he was in his truck tires, spitting gravel gone before I could form a response. I stood there, shaking the condemnation notice crumpling in my fist, and understood with perfect clarity that Sterling would do whatever it took to keep his secrets buried, including possibly whatever he'd done to Vivian that had made her disappear from public life so completely. The rest of the day blurred past in frantic activity. Evelyn made calls, used every connection she had to find someone who could help. Most lawyers didn't return her messages. The ones who did explained gently that fighting county condemnation required money and time. We didn't have that. Appealing would take months, that Sterling's influence in local government made victory unlikely. By evening, we'd found exactly one person willing to take the case. Rebecca Martinez, 38, worked for Nevada Legal Aid out of an office in Reno. She sounded tired on the phone, overworked, operating on the edge of burnout that came from caring too much about cases that didn't pay enough. She listened to our story, asked pointed questions, requested copies of all our documentation. Then, after a long silence, she spoke carefully. I can file an emergency injunction to delay the condemnation. Buy you maybe a week too if we're lucky. But Ms. Walker, you need to understand something. Going after Sterling means going after a multi-million-dollar company with expensive lawyers and political connections. This will get ugly. I thought about Vivian building her impossible dream in a basement, losing everything that mattered, dying alone. About Isabel running from scandal at 16, never getting the chance to learn the truth. About 20 years of stolen work and silenced voices and unpunished crimes. My answer was steady. I understand. File the injunction. The week that followed taught me what war felt like when fought with paperwork and procedure. Rebecca filed the emergency injunction. The county's lawyers responded with a motion to dismiss. We countered with documentation of the working Aurora system. They claimed the system itself was illegal, unpermitted grounds for even harsher penalties. And through it all, Sterling escalated. First came his employees. 2 men in company uniforms who showed up claiming they needed to inspect the electrical connections for safety violations. Evelyn turned them away, citing the pending legal case. They returned the next day with Sheriff Wade, who informed us that obstruction of official inspections was a criminal offense. We let them in, watched them photograph everything, catalog every piece of equipment, building the case for condemnation piece by piece. Then came the night visit. I was back at the gas station, too stubborn to leave despite Evelyn's protests, when headlights swept across the windows at 2 a.m. Multiple vehicles, this time 4 or 5, circling the property. Copper's barking woke me from uneasy sleep. I crouched by the window, heart hammering, watching shadows move in the darkness. They didn't approach the building, didn't try to enter, just circled slowly, deliberately, making sure I knew they were there, making sure I understood the threat. After 20 minutes, they left, engines fading into the desert silence. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I read Vivian's journal cover to cover, looking for something I'd missed, some detail that could turn the tide. Found nothing except her growing desperation, her failing hope, her final recognition that she'd lost. But I wasn't Vivian. I had Evelyn, who worked tirelessly to document the Aurora system, to photograph and measure and prove its functionality. I had Willa and Luther Finch and Joe, all willing to testify despite their fear. I had Rebecca fighting against impossible odds because someone needed to. And I had something Vivian hadn't. I had nothing left to lose. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday, 6 days after Sterling's condemnation notice. Rebecca coached me over the phone, explained what to expect, warned me that judges rarely sided against county building inspectors. The best we could hope for was a delay, more time to build our case. Thursday night, I sat in the basement with Evelyn, surrounded by the evidence of Vivian's genius. The solar panels she'd installed, the batteries she'd configured, the control systems she'd designed from scratch, all of it functional, all of it brilliant, all of it threatening to be buried under legal maneuvering and political pressure. Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "Your grandmother would be proud of you." I looked at her, this woman who'd given me shelter and purpose and something like family in the span of 2 weeks. Would she? I haven't accomplished anything except making Sterling angry. She smiled, sad and fierce at once. "You're still here. You're still fighting. That's what courage looks like, not fearlessness, just choosing what matters and refusing to let go." The words lodged somewhere deep, next to Patricia's advice about asking for help, next to Vivian's journal entries about persistence, next to every lesson I'd learned about survival from 18 years of being nobody's priority. I was building a foundation from borrowed wisdom, constructing an identity from fragments and scraps, and the stubborn insistence that I deserved to exist. Friday dawned clear and hot. The hearing was at 2 p.m. Rebecca met us outside the county courthouse, looking professional in a suit that had seen better days, carrying a briefcase stuffed with our documentation. She gripped my hand briefly, her palm dry and warm. Confidence I didn't quite feel colored her voice. "Remember, let me do the talking. If the judge asks you direct questions, answer honestly and concisely. Don't let Sterling's lawyer bait you into arguments." Sterling was already inside, flanked by 2 attorneys in suits that probably cost more than my annual food budget. He looked confident, relaxed, like this was just another piece of routine business. When his eyes met mine, he smiled. The message was clear. This was already over. I just hadn't accepted it yet. The hearing lasted 45 minutes. Rebecca presented our case with passionate precision, walking the judge through the documentation of Aurora's functionality, the timeline of Sterling's patent filings, the evidence of a conspiracy to suppress clean energy technology. Sterling's lawyers countered with code violations, safety concerns, the county's obligation to protect citizens from unlicensed electrical work. The judge, a thin woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression suggesting she'd seen everything twice, listened without visible reaction. When both sides finished, she removed her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, sighed. Her verdict was careful, measured. "I'm granting a temporary stay on the condemnation order. 2 weeks to allow Ms. Walker time to address the code violations or secure proper permits. However, I want to be clear. The county's safety concerns are valid. If those violations aren't corrected within the specified time frame, condemnation will proceed." 2 weeks, 14 days to achieve what Vivian had spent years building, to navigate a system designed to prevent exactly what we were trying to do. Rebecca tried to sound optimistic on the courthouse steps, talked about securing permits, hiring licensed contractors, documenting everything properly. But I saw Sterling's expression as he left. He knew what I was beginning to understand. 2 weeks wasn't enough time. Not with the county officials in his pocket, not with every contractor in the region afraid of his influence, not with the system rigged against us from the start. I was going to lose Aurora the same way Vivian had, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Defeat lasted exactly 16 hours. I spent them in the library's back room, staring at the ceiling while Copper pressed his weight against my side, and Evelyn made phone calls I could hear through the thin walls. Her voice cycled through frustration, determination, anger, then back to frustration. Nobody wanted to help. Nobody wanted to cross Sterling. The system was working exactly as designed. At dawn, something shifted. Maybe exhaustion finally burned through the despair. Maybe Vivian's ghost whispered in my ear. Maybe I was just too stubborn to accept that Sterling got to win twice. I sat up, startling Copper, and pulled out the journal one more time. The technical drawings were meticulous. every component, labeled every connection, mapped every specification noted in Vivian's precise hand. She'd designed Aurora to be reproducible, to be understood by someone willing to learn. And I was willing. I had to be. Evelyn found me an hour later surrounded by photocopies, sketching my own diagrams on legal pads. She set down coffee without comment, waited for me to explain. My voice was hoarse from disuse. "We have 2 weeks. That's enough time to activate the system if we work fast enough. Once Aurora's running, once 10 houses are connected, the safe opens, and we get whatever evidence Vivian left inside. Evidence that predates Sterling's fraud case, that proves she built this first." Evelyn sat down slowly. "Margot, even if we could activate everything in 2 weeks, we'd need licensed contractors. The permits alone—" I cut her off. "We don't need permits if we're not building new infrastructure. Aurora already exists. We're just turning it on. And Vivian documented everything. If her work was legal in 1998, it's legal now." The logic was shaky, built on desperation more than legal precedent. But Evelyn's expression shifted, calculation replacing doubt. She pulled the journal toward her, flipped through pages, stopped at a detailed schematic of the solar array. Her engineer's mind was already working. If the panels are still functional after 20 years, if the inverters haven't degraded too badly, if the battery bank holds charge, we'd need to check every connection, replace failed components, test the whole system under load before connecting homes. The shift from if to how felt like oxygen after drowning. I leaned forward. "So, it's possible—" She met my eyes. "It's insane, but yes, theoretically possible." A pause. "We'd need help. 2 people can't install 12 solar panels, mount wind turbines, and activate a geothermal system in 14 days. Willa Whitmore made 3 phone calls and solved the problem. By noon, we had a crew. Pete Kowalski, 52, who'd done electrical work before the housing crash forced him into construction. Jim Murphy, 48, whose family had been in Pine Creek since the 1960s, and who remembered Vivian as the lady who'd fixed his father's generator for free in 1997. Both had licenses, both needed money, both were tired enough of Sterling's monopoly to take the risk. They met us at the gas station, took one look at the basement, and whistled in unison. Pete's voice carried genuine admiration. "Holy hell, your grandmother built a power plant." We spread Vivian's diagrams across the metal table and made a plan. 7 days of brutal work, 1 day of buffer for inevitable problems. Day 1 and 2 solar panels. Day 3 wind turbines. Days 4 and 5 underground cable inspection and repair. Day 6 geothermal activation. Day 7 connections and testing. The cost estimate made my stomach drop. $8,000 for replacement parts, equipment rental, permitting fees if we could rush them through. I had $200 in my pocket and nothing else. Evelyn saw my face, pulled out her checkbook before I could protest. Her tone brooked no argument. "This is a loan, not charity. Once Aurora's running, you'll have income from the households you connect. You can pay me back over time." When I tried to thank her, she shook her head. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Vivian. She deserved better than what this town gave her." We started at 6 a.m. the next morning. The August heat was already brutal. The kind of dry, scorching warmth that turned metal too hot to touch and made every breath feel like inhaling sandpaper. Pete and Jim set up a work site on the station's roof where the solar panels would mount. I became their runner, hauling equipment, holding tools, learning by watching their hands move with practiced efficiency. Vivian's journal was my textbook. Between tasks, I studied her notes on panel orientation, on wiring configurations, on the delicate balance between generating capacity and storage limitations. The technical language that had seemed impenetrable 2 weeks ago was starting to make sense, patterns emerging from the jargon. By sunset, the first day, we'd mounted 4 panels. My shoulders ached, my hands were blistered, and every muscle felt like it had been beaten with hammers. Evelyn brought sandwiches and electrolyte drinks, made us stop working long enough to eat. We sat on the cooling concrete as stars emerged overhead, too tired for conversation, sustained by shared purpose. Day 2 brought the first real failure. I was helping Pete lift a panel onto the mounting rack when my grip slipped. The panel tilted, slid from his hands, hit the roof edge, and tumbled 8 feet to the ground. The sound of shattering glass was distinct and final. The silence that followed was worse. $600 of irreplaceable equipment destroyed by my carelessness. Pete's face was carefully neutral. Jim looked away. I felt tears burn behind my eyes and refused to let them fall. Evelyn's voice was gentle. Accidents happen. We budget for losses. But we didn't have budget for losses. We had $8,000 stretched across 7 days and no margin for error. I climbed down, swept up the broken glass, and made Pete show me 3 times how to grip the panels correctly before we lifted the next one. No more mistakes. No more failures born of ignorance or haste. By the end of day 2, all 12 panels were mounted and wired. The array looked professional, almost beautiful, angled to catch maximum sun. We stood back and admired our work, while Copper investigated the perimeter, tail wagging with approval. Jim grinned, the first real smile I'd seen from him. Your grandmother would be proud. This is quality work. Day 3 was wind turbines. Smaller units than I'd imagined, vertical axis designs that looked like elegant sculptures more than machinery. They'd been stored in the second basement chamber, wrapped in protective plastic that had kept them pristine for 2 decades. We hauled them up piece by piece, assembled them on the shed roof according to Vivian's detailed instructions. I was tightening the final bolt when my foot slipped on sun-heated metal. The world tilted. I had one moment of perfect clarity, seeing the ground 8 feet below, understanding exactly how much this was going to hurt. Then I was falling, grabbing reflexively, hitting dirt with an impact that knocked the air from my lungs. Evelyn's face appeared above me, pale with worry. Don't move. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. My left shoulder had taken most of the impact, pain radiating down my arm in waves that made my vision gray at the edges. But I could move my fingers, could flex my elbow. Not broken, just badly bruised. She helped me sit up slowly. That's it. We're done for today. You need ice and rest. The protective instinct in her voice made my throat tight. Nobody had worried about me like that in years, maybe ever. But we didn't have time for rest, didn't have days to waste on injuries. I let her bandage the shoulder, swallowed the painkillers she insisted on, then climbed back up to finish securing the turbine. Pete shook his head but didn't argue. Stubborn runs in your family, I see. The turbine spun freely in the desert wind blades, cutting the air with a soft whisper. Connected to the system, they'd generate supplemental power, reduce the load on batteries during peak demand. Small contributions, but Vivian's design was all about distributed generation, multiple sources working in harmony. Days 4 and 5 were underground work. We traced the cable runs from the basement to the 3 connected houses, checking insulation, testing continuity, replacing corroded connectors. Then came the hard part, extending lines to 7 new houses, running wire through existing conduits where possible, trenching new paths where necessary. Luther Finch, Harold's son, was 76 but worked like a man half his age. He showed up on day 4 with a trenching spade and 3 decades of anger at Sterling Energy's price gouging. Together we dug narrow channels through caliche-hardened earth, our hands blistering in identical places, sweat soaking through shirts in minutes. Willa appeared at lunch with a cooler full of homemade bread and cold chicken. She moved through our makeshift work site like a general inspecting troops, offering encouragement, asking pointed questions about progress. When she left, she pressed $200 into my hand. Her voice was fierce. From Harold's insurance. He would have wanted it to go to this. By evening of day 5, we had 10 houses ready for connection. The cable runs were complete, junction boxes installed, everything tested and verified. Tomorrow was the geothermal system, the heart of Aurora, the component that would provide steady baseline power regardless of sun or wind. That night Sterling made his move. The legal notice arrived via sheriff's deputy at 7 p.m. Immediate cease and desist order. Unlicensed electrical work in violation of county code. Evelyn Blackwood specifically named as operating without a valid professional license. Failure to comply would result in criminal charges. The papers shook in Evelyn's hands. She'd let her license lapse when she retired 5 years ago, never imagining she'd need it again. Now Sterling was using that technicality as a weapon, threatening her with prosecution if she continued helping. Her voice was hollow. I'm sorry, Margot. I can't risk my pension, my professional reputation. I have to stop. The words hit harder than falling off the shed had. Evelyn had been my anchor, my teacher, the closest thing to family I'd found in Pine Creek. Without her technical knowledge, without her steady presence, the rest of the plan felt impossible. I forced myself to speak calmly. I understand. You've already done more than I had any right to ask. She looked at me, and something in her expression cracked. You don't understand. I want to help. I want to see Sterling lose everything he stole. But I'm 67 years old and this is all I have left. If he destroys me, I interrupted gently, he already destroyed Vivian. He's not getting you too. The resignation in her face hurt worse than any physical injury. She left quietly, and I sat alone in the darkening gas station with Copper's head in my lap and tomorrow's impossible task looming. Pete and Jim arrived at 6 a.m. on day 6. They'd heard about the cease and desist, had debated all night whether to continue. Their presence was answer enough. We descended into the second basement without Evelyn, without her expertise, with only Vivian's journal and our collective determination. The geothermal system was more complex than anything we'd attempted. I read instructions aloud while Pete and Jim interpreted them, translating Vivian's technical language into actionable steps. Prime the pumps, check the pressure seals, open the underground valves, slowly watching for leaks. Wait for the Earth's heat to warm the circulating water. Hours passed. The temperature gauge climbed gradually, 100 degrees, 120, 140, then 150, the threshold where steam generation became possible. Pete opened the turbine valve and we heard it spin slow at first building speed as pressure increased. The control panel flickered to life. Lights we'd never seen illuminate began glowing green. Power flowing, the system awakening after 20 years of dormancy. I wanted to cheer, wanted to cry, wanted to call Evelyn and tell her we'd done it. Then I heard the hissing, a thin, high-pitched sound that made Pete's face go pale. One of the circulation pipes had developed a leak, steam escaping in a visible plume. Pressure was dropping, the turbine slowing. Jim's voice was tight. We need to shut it down. Fix the leak, restart the system. That'll take hours we don't have. But I was remembering Joe, the garage owner who'd helped carry equipment, who'd offered tools and advice, who'd mentioned he'd done welding work in his youth before arthritis made his hands too unsteady for precision work. If anyone could patch a leak fast enough, I was already climbing the ladder, already running for Joe's garage 3 blocks away. Found him under the hood of a 1987 Ford, hands black with grease. Explained the situation in gasps, my lungs burning from the sprint. He wiped his hands slowly, considering. I haven't welded pipe in 15 years. The desperation in my voice was raw. Please, you're the only person who can do this. He grabbed his equipment without another word. We were back at the gas station in 10 minutes, descending into the chamber where Pete and Jim had shut down the turbine, isolated the damaged section. Joe examined the leak with professional focus, then nodded once. His torch flared to life. I held the flashlight steady while he worked, watching molten metal flow into the gap, seal the breach. 20 minutes of breathless concentration. Then he tested the seal, declared it sound, helped us restart the system. By noon, the geothermal generator was running at full capacity. 500 kilowatts of clean, constant power flowing through cables Vivian had buried decades ago. The magnitude of what we'd accomplished was almost too large to process. We stood in the chamber, sweating and exhausted and victorious, while above us the desert sun blazed on. Pete gripped my shoulder, careful of the bruising. One more day. Just the connections. Day 7 dawned with perfect clarity. No clouds, no wind, just relentless August heat, and the weight of everything riding on the next 12 hours. We needed to connect 10 houses to make the system legitimate, to open the safe, to prove Aurora worked. Sterling knew it too. I could feel his presence like pressure before a storm, waiting for his moment. The first connection went smoothly. Mrs. Patterson on Willow Street, a widow living on disability who'd been stealing electricity for years by running an extension cord from her neighbor's outdoor outlet. When her lights blazed without that cord, she wept openly. Her gratitude was almost painful. I thought I'd die before I could afford my own power again. We moved house by house, Pete and Jim handling the technical work while I documented everything with my phone camera. Mrs. Patterson was 1, the Johnsons on Maple made 2, the Reeves family 3. Each connection felt like a small miracle, proof that Vivian's vision had been real, had been possible all along. We were connecting house number 5 when Sterling's convoy arrived. 3 vehicles this time, his black pickup leading, followed by 2 county cars. The message was clear. He wasn't coming to threaten anymore. He was coming to stop us by force. I met him at the gas station, Pete and Jim flanking me. Sterling emerged looking like the end of a long battle, his suit slightly rumpled, his expression tight with fury barely contained. His voice was cold precision. You were ordered to cease all electrical work. You violated that order. I'm here to ensure compliance. Behind him, Sheriff Wade and 2 deputies waited. All of them armed, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I thought about running about hiding in the basement, about all the ways this could end badly. Then I thought about Vivian refusing to run 20 years ago, standing her ground until they'd destroyed her anyway. My voice was steady. We're not building anything new. We're activating existing infrastructure. That's not a code violation. Sterling smiled without warmth. The county will determine what constitutes a violation. In the meantime, I'm shutting down your operation. He moved toward the basement door. I stepped into his path without thinking, my body making the decision before my brain could talk me out of it. We stood inches apart, his height and weight and power overwhelming my stubbornness, the only thing keeping me vertical. The words came from somewhere deep. You're going to have to go through me. For a long moment we held that tableau. Then Sterling's hand shot out, gripped my arm hard enough to hurt, started to shove me aside. Copper's growl became a snarl as he launched himself forward. Pete grabbed Sterling's other arm. Jim positioned himself between us and the sheriff. Everything happened fast after that. Sterling wrenching free, storming toward the basement despite our attempts to block him. The deputies moving forward, hands on their weapons. Me trying to follow Pete, holding me back. The sound of Sterling's footsteps descending the metal stairs. Then we all froze at the new sound. Engines, multiple vehicles pulling into the lot. I turned and saw 5 cars, 10 people emerging. Willa Whitmore in the lead, followed by Luther Finch. Joe from the garage, Mrs. Patterson and her adult children, the Johnson family, the Reeves, others I didn't recognize. Willa's voice carried absolute authority. Sheriff Wade, these folks are here to testify that the Aurora Project has been providing safe, reliable power to this community for 20 years. If you shut it down now, you're condemning innocent people to Sterling's price gouging. Is that really what you want on your conscience? Wade looked torn between his loyalty to Sterling and the sudden presence of voters whose opinions actually mattered. The calculus was shifting, the balance of power tilting just slightly. Before he could respond, a crash echoed from below, metal on metal, violent and deliberate. Sterling was in the second chamber. Sterling was destroying the geothermal system. I was moving before thought caught up, racing down the stairs with Copper at my heels. Pete shouted something behind me, but I didn't stop, didn't slow, just hit the basement running and kept going down to where Sterling stood with a sledgehammer raised above his head, aimed at the main pressure vessel. No time for fear. No time for calculation. I threw myself between him and the equipment, my body the only shield I had. His swing had already started, too much momentum to stop. The hammer redirected at the last second, glancing off my shoulder, the already bruised one, and I went down hard, pain exploding in white-hot waves. Copper hit Sterling at knee height, 70 pounds of loyal fury knocking him off balance. The hammer clattered to the concrete floor. Above, footsteps thundered as everyone poured down after me. Evelyn's voice cutting through the chaos, having arrived with Willa's group. The command in her tone was absolute. "Garrett Sterling, step away from that equipment before you kill someone." He stood there, chest heaving, surrounded by witnesses, his calculated control finally shattered. Blood ran from my nose where I'd hit the floor. My shoulder felt like broken glass grinding together. But the geothermal system was intact, still running, still generating power. Sheriff Wade appeared in the doorway, took in the scene. Sterling with the hammer. Me bleeding on the floor, a dozen townspeople crowding the stairs as witnesses. The political calculation became simple. Protect Sterling and lose the next election, or enforce actual law for once. His voice was weary. "Mr. Sterling, I'm placing you under arrest for assault and criminal trespass." The next hours blurred. County deputies arriving, the real ones from Reno, who didn't owe Sterling favors. Evelyn and Willa getting me upstairs, cleaning my face, checking my pupils for concussion. Pete and Jim finishing the remaining connections while I sat on the concrete outside, shock setting in, watching everything happen through a haze of pain and adrenaline crash. House number 6 connected. 7, 8, 9. The sun was setting, painting the desert in copper and gold when Jim climbed out of the basement and gave me a thumbs up. His grin was enormous. "Number 10 is live. Aurora's at full capacity." I stood shakily, Evelyn supporting my good side, and walked down into the second chamber one more time. The safe's biometric screen glowed in the dim light. I pressed my thumb to the sensor, half expecting another rejection. The screen flickered. System complete. Full capacity achieved. DNA verification bypassed. "Welcome home, Margot Quinn Walker." The lock disengaged with a soft click. The safe door swung open slowly, revealing the legacy Vivian had protected for 20 years. The patent documents came first, thick sheaves of official paper with Vivian's name stamped across every page. Aurora Project Distributed Renewable Energy System. Filed 1998, approved 2001, valid through 2038. Beneath them, the evidence of Sterling's theft. His patent applications from 2004, identical schematics, her designs stolen word for word. Then the legal documents. Correspondence between Sterling and county officials, quid pro quo arrangements, bribes documented in email form that nobody had expected to see the light of day. Proof of conspiracy, fraud, extortion. Enough to destroy him 10 times over. And at the bottom, a USB drive labeled in Vivian's handwriting. For Margot. We surfaced with the safe's contents, spread everything on the hood of Evelyn's Volvo under the emerging stars. I held the USB drive knowing what it contained, but not ready to face it. Finally, with everyone watching, I plugged it into Evelyn's laptop. The video was dated November 17, 2023, 8 months ago, a month before Vivian died. She looked old, far older than 70 should look. Chemotherapy had stolen her hair, left her skin translucent and fragile, but her eyes were sharp, her voice steady as she spoke directly to the camera. The words hit like hammer blows. Margot, my granddaughter, if you're watching this, you've done what I couldn't. You've activated Aurora. You've proven it works. I'm so proud of you. A pause. She wiped her eyes, composed herself. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you grew up. The court order from the fraud case prevented me from contacting Isabel or any descendants. I violated it once, hired a private investigator to find you when you were 12. Saw photos of you at the orphanage, smiling despite everything. You looked so strong, so much like your mother, so much like me. Tears were streaming down my face now, ugly and uncontrolled. Evelyn's hand found mine, squeezed. I built Aurora for the future. For you. For a world that deserves clean energy, that deserves freedom from men like Sterling who hoard power and call it business. Don't let them silence the truth. Women in our family deserve respect. We deserve to be remembered for what we built, not what they took from us. She leaned closer to the camera, and her smile was fierce despite the exhaustion. Live well, granddaughter. Love the people who help you. Build something that matters. And know that even though I never got to hold you, I loved you every single day. The video ended. I sat there in the desert darkness, surrounded by people who'd become family, holding proof of my grandmother's genius and Sterling's crimes, and finally understood what legacy meant. Not the money or the patents or the power system itself, the choice to keep building despite everything trying to tear you down. I wiped my face, stood on shaking legs. We need to call Rebecca. Tell her we have everything we need to bury Sterling. The legal process moved faster than I'd imagined. Within 2 weeks, Sterling Energy Solutions was under federal investigation. The fraud case from 2004 was reopened, this time with evidence that couldn't be suppressed or dismissed. Sterling himself faced multiple felony charges. His monopoly on Pine Creek's power supply collapsed, leaving room for actual competition. I registered Walker Renewable Energy, LLC, with Willa as part-time accountant and Evelyn as technical director. We connected the remaining interested households, 45 in total, charging rates, half what Sterling had been extracting. Revenue barely covered maintenance costs at first, especially when one wind turbine failed after 2 months and needed a $12,000 replacement. But we were building something real, something that mattered. Every bill we sent was proof that Vivian had been right, that clean energy was possible, that monopolies weren't inevitable. 6 months after that first desperate night in the gas station, I stood on the roof watching sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Copper dozed at my feet, graying around the muzzle, now content. Evelyn appeared with 2 glasses of iced tea, handed me one without comment. We drank in comfortable silence, watching the town come to life as darkness fell. Streetlights flickering on in sequence. Houses glowing warm against the desert night. The park where children played under LED illumination, safe and visible. Evelyn's voice was soft. What are you thinking? The answer came easily. That 6 months ago I had nothing. No family, no home, no idea who I was or where I came from. Now I have everything that actually matters. She smiled. Vivian would be proud. Across the street, Willa waved from her porch, her house warm and bright with Aurora's power. Luther drove past in his ancient pickup, honking once in greeting. Joe's garage sign glowed against the evening sky, open late as always. This was legacy. Not the technology itself, but the community it enabled. The connections it built. The proof that one person's refusal to give up could ripple forward through decades, touching lives they'd never meet. They'd thrown me out when I turned 18, told me I had nothing. They were wrong. I had Vivian's stubborn determination and Evelyn's steady guidance and a town full of people who'd chosen to believe in something better. I had copper's warmth and the desert's brutal beauty and a power system that turned sunlight and earth heat into freedom. I had purpose. I had family, the kind you choose and build and fight to protect. And I had the light my grandmother had hidden beneath the desert, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. That was legacy. That was home. And I was never giving it up again.